So what's happened at the Battle of Yarmouk then?
The interest to me in the Battle of Yarmouk is it's the genesis of the conflict between Christendom and Islam. That's really its significance. And so basically, we got to go back to the beginning, to Muhammad, right? Muhammad's dead, 632, and now you have what's called the Ridda Wars, which is after he died, a lot of Arabian tribes tried to break away from the fold of Islam. And the first Caliph, Abu Bakr, launched these apostasy wars, which is very interesting because even till this day, Muslim clerics will tell you, without the law of apostasy, which is you kill anyone who tries to leave Islam, Islam would have died out. I mean, they actually say that. They admit it. That's why we have to have the apostasy law, because if people have freedom to leave, it will be gone.
So those are the culture of apostasy, punishing apostasy, didn't exist before then under Muhammad.
No, it did. He's the one who
did. Yeah.
It goes to a hadith, a statement attributed to him, which is considered canonical in Sahih Bukhari, where he says literally, whoever leaves his religion, meaning Islam, kill him.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always part of the religion, according to that teaching, that hadith, and that's why it's still there.
Okay, so by the second generation of Muslim leaders, they're now codifying that and...
Yeah, well, when and how Islamic law gets codified is kind of a controversial thing, depending on which version you want to go to, but most of it happens much later after Muhammad. Maybe like he dies 632. Really, the first writings and the hadith are maybe around 750. And this is why there's a school of thought that says Muhammad never existed and it was all fabricated later to give a hagiographical foundational story to the Umayyad Empire. But at any rate, so you have now the Muslim power is consolidated under Abu Bakr and then later the other Caliph Omar, who are companions and friends of Muhammad. And now the jihad is waged in earnest. Now, here's the first interesting thing that few people understand. In 632, if I talk to someone, your average person, and I talk about the Middle East or North Africa, and they know it's Muslim, they don't know how it got Muslim. They think it's always been Muslim. In the dawn of Islam, during this time that I'm discussing, 632 and so forth, the Eastern world, Egypt, Greater Syria, as it was called, which encompassed modern-day Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, it was a big chunk, Anatolia or Turkey, what we call Turkey, and like I said, Egypt, all the way down to Morocco, Mauritania, and Augustine's Hippo was there in Tunisia. All that was actually more Christian than Europe. So if you talked about Christianity at the dawn of Islam, you were talking about Egypt, you were talking about Syria, you're talking about Asia Minor, Greece, of course, and Europe. But Europe was actually less Christian. And of course, anything northwest of the Danube Rhine was still not even Germany. The Scandinavian lands hadn't even reached Christianity at that point. And this is why the Roman Emperor Constantine moved the capital of Rome, New Rome, Constantinople, to the east. Because that's where everything was. That's where the learning was. That's where the sophisticated culture was, the wealth. All right. And again, when people, we have records of people traveling through Egypt and they say all we heard from the top of the Nile to the bottom is just hymns and church bells, etc. This is before Islam. Same thing with Syria. Okay. So people miss this context. This is what the Middle East was. If you wanted to talk about Christianity, there were 5 major centers. Okay. They call them Sees. One was Rome. And the other 4 were in the Middle East, okay? One was Alexandria, one was Antioch, one was Jerusalem, and then later Constantinople, all east, and all conquered by Islam, okay, which we'll get into. So anyway, we have the first major attack, and we have the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, and the Muslims prevail.
Where is Yarmouk?
Yeah, Yarmouk is a river in Syria, or it was in Greater Syria at the time, so I don't know if it's in part of Jordan now, but I'm pretty sure it's in Syria still. And that's where the 2 major armies, the Eastern Roman Empire, which they call Byzantium. I sort of don't like that word because it sort of creates a discontinuity between the Roman Empire. They saw themselves as Romans. Even the Arab accounts call them Romans, so this word Byzantine, anyway, but it's short, it's easy, it's succinct. So I interchange them. But the Eastern Roman Empire, basically, and the Arabs, the Muslims, fought there, and it was a major epic confrontations, and the Christians lost. And for various reasons, among it, there was a desert storm, which they weren't used to fighting in, whereas the Arabs were. And it takes on a great, it's very hagiographical tradition amongst Arabs. This is, where it all begins, and this is where Allah proved he was for us because we beat the infidels, etc., etc. And, I won't get into it, but anyone who's interested really should read about the battle, because a lot of what, ISIS, the Islamic State, the stuff they would say, which sort of sounds cryptic and people didn't understand it, they would say things like, we've tasted American blood and none is sweeter. And people just thought they're being gross. Actually, they were quoting characters from the Battle of Yarmouk, Muslim heroes, specifically Khalid bin al-Walid, known as the Sword of Allah, who said to the Romans, we've tasted Roman blood and none is sweeter. All right. So when a lot of the things they would say is actually from that battle and other battles as well. But that's how, these battles and major confrontations with the Christian world where they prevailed still figure very prominently in their historical consciousness, whereas to most Westerners, they have no clue, right?
Yeah.
So at any rate, the battle happens, the West, the Christians lose. And now begins the great takeover of the Middle East. All right, Egypt, which was a major center for the Roman Empire, gets conquered 4 years later, right, or 5 years, around 640, 641, and they continue marching all the way west until they get to Morocco around 690. They take over Carthage, where and Augustine and Hippo, so all these major centers, and in Syria as well, completely conquered. Jerusalem is conquered 1 year after Yarmouk. All right, it's like a complete domino effect. And there's theories of why this is. One of them is that the Byzantine Empire was very weakened at the time. But also the Muslims enter and conquer Persia, the Sasanian Empire at the time. Okay, and now now Iran's been conquered, and they continue eastward. But for brevity's sake, I'll continue focusing on the Western Christian world. And so now, from 632, the year Muhammad died, 1 century later, 732, Muslims are now in the middle of Europe, fighting and abducting people and destroying churches.
Not just the middle of Europe. I mean, as far north as Tours in France.
That's why that's the date. 732 is the Battle of Tours, which is right in the heart of France. Spain has been conquered since 711. Okay, now after they took over Morocco, now they sailed into Spain, and that was completely conquered and devastated. And now they're in the middle of France, okay, attacking, and this is the Battle of Tours. So in 1 century from Muhammad's death, and historians have actually quantified it, but it's basically they conquered 3/4 of the original Christian world permanently.
Wow.
In Spain, not permanently, but for like 8 centuries they were there. And of course, in France, they still continued depredations. And the Mediterranean islands were all conquered around the 8th century. Sicily and Malta and all of them, Cyprus and Rhodes, for centuries. And again, to me, I'm just baffled at how people don't understand. These were not just Christian countries. These were the main Christian countries, and they just got conquered and Islamized, and nobody knows this. If you talk about those countries now, like Egypt or Syria, most people just have this vague notion they were always Muslim, and Islam spread there. No. And again, if you look at the sources, both the Arabic and Islamic and the European chronicles, they make it unequivocally clear this was violent bloodshed, conquest. And it's even worse in the Arabic recordings because they boast about it. The more violent it is, and the more, the atrocities committed against the Christian infidels, and the more churches destroyed, this is more a reflection of how pious the Muslim conquerors were. So it's actually worse in the Arab. I always find this amazing that it's more graphic sometimes than the European ones, which are a little more objective. They say, yes, we were attacked and thousands were butchered and enslaved in churches. But the Muslim ones revel in it. Okay. And so now let's just stop for a moment. None of this is being taught in any school at all.
Can I just ask, do you have a sense of the death toll in that 1st century?
No. I mean, unfortunately, 7th century is what we're talking about. We're lucky to have just the records that we have. But, and I know I put it in Sword and Scimitar where I talk about various regions that get conquered, and then some chronicle mentions a number. Okay. But it's very hard. It's very sketchy that time. I mean, we're now nearing to what traditionally was called the Dark Ages, because we have, which by the way, and we can get into, is a product of Islam. Okay. And many people don't know this. And since I'm at it, okay, we're almost there. So basically after what happened and so the Mediterranean used to be known as kind of the Roman lake, and everyone, Egypt and Syria and all of North Africa and Europe were all connected. It was part of one empire. After Islam took everything basically south of that, North Africa and the Middle East, and I already told you that was the richer, more profound, the more sophisticated region. Little Europe, the rest of the Christian was cut off completely. Papyrus ended. It used to come from Egypt. That supply was eliminated. All of that is historically, was the beginning of what historians would call the Dark Ages. Okay. And you don't know, and one historian, Henry Perrin, he was, I think, a Belgian historian in the 19th century, an Orientalist, as they called them. He actually had an entire thesis about this. And basically his line is, without Muhammad, there'd be no Charlemagne. The rise of Charlemagne and the Frankish state was basically a response to the nonstop Islamic aggression and the discontinuity of the Mediterranean. This is why now Europe had to develop on its own and start anew. And it was the young kid on the block, the barbarians who had, conquered and assimilated into Christendom in the 5th century and whatnot. They no longer had the assistance of the East as they did before. Okay. And so now they became the small final bastion of Christendom. And they continued being attacked by Muslims. To finish this idea of the Dark Ages. So so people will tell you the Dark Ages historic, and they don't even want to use that term anymore for various reasons, but they would say it was the 8th century and the 9th century. And they would tell you because of Viking attacks and, attacks from nomadic tribes in the East. But the real attack was Islam. Okay. That was the main one from the South. And the Vikings, people don't even understand that a lot of the Viking raids, especially for slaves, okay, white slaves, was to feed the Arab slave emporium because there was such a demand for white slaves.
So Vikings were selling.
Yeah, they would go to Ireland and England and France and wherever and conquer. And all those slaves, most of them would be sold down through the rivers of Russia to the caliphates, the Abbasids, for example, the Abbasid Caliphate. That used to be a well-known thing. And we know this as well because a lot of the treasure troves of Viking coins that are found in Scandinavia are Arab coins. So what commodity do Vikings have to give? Slaves. And we also have records for it. So, the whole point is Islam has had a profound impact on the shaping of Europe. And there's historians, I quote one in one of my books, something Cardini, where he basically says Islam was a midwife to Europe. It created Europe. And the reason Europe became martial and you had the night culture and everything and a very staunch Christian kind of defensive posture was because of Islam. It was surrounding it. And they knew what happened. They understood that 3/4 of Christendom was destroyed and conquered and Islamized. We haven't even reached the Crusades. Okay. And look what Islam had done. And I'm here to tell you, because I've looked at this and parents write to me about school books, textbooks, and social science books. What I just described to you doesn't even get any mention. You just get one sentence about how Islam spread through trade in the Middle East. And they won't tell you the Middle East was so Christian before that. They always like to act like Europe was Christian and everything else wasn't. No, Europe was the leftover portion of Christendom that never got conquered.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode. And for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.